At least 18 deaths and more than 1,000 cases of a mysterious lung illness have been linked with vaping by health authorities in America. It's led to the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, to advise people to stop using vaping products or e-cigarettes. Some US states have moved to ban vaping, and President Trump has said he wants a nationwide ban on flavoured vapes.
Vaping has become a very big business, as I understand it, like a giant business in a very short period of time. But we can't allow people to get sick, and we can't have our youth be so affected. People are dying with vaping.
The vaping industry is fighting back, as is big tobacco. We'll hear from them in just a moment. But first, many of those affected by this mysterious lung disease in the US are teenagers. And in the main, these teenagers were vapors of products made by one particular company, an American company called Juul. It has about 75% of the market there. Juul's products are very popular amongst younger Americans, with some alleging the company deliberately targeted this age group in its marketing. Jerry Sullivan's 17-year-old son Eddie was a Juul user when he was hospitalized.
Eddie woke up with a fever on a Saturday morning at the end of July and spent the whole weekend in bed. Just a routine fever, had no appetite. And that Sunday when we went to sleep, he woke me up to tell me that he had vomited a few times and he was in some extreme stomach pain. So we set off for the local hospital about 3 o'clock in the morning. And they did all kinds of tests, and they came back and told us that he had pneumonia. So we went home, took the prescription medication that gave him the antibiotics, and the following day, he said it would really hurt to breathe. He had some pain in his chest, and that his breathing was getting very labored, and as the day went on, it got more and more difficult. And they put him into the pediatric intensive care unit, and it wasn't until he disclosed to the doctors about some teenage issues that he had been vaping. The doctors said that they're seeing more and more cases of this. The one doctor did not sugarcoat anything. He basically said, you cannot inhale any of these substances ever again or you will die. Your lungs will become sicker and sicker, and eventually they'll just stop working. Kids need to understand how dangerous this is. Parents need to educate themselves. I have to admit, at the very beginning of all this, I was very naive to what vaping was. I didn't understand. He tried to explain to me that it was okay. He justified it because it was mango flavored. You know, it's okay, Mom, it's just mango vapor. And I think that if parents aren't educated, they might believe that too. And a lot of these vaping devices are very discreet. So sometimes kids are vaping right under their parents' noses and parents don't even understand that that's happening.
So what does the US vaping industry have to say about it all? Juul has already stopped selling some of its flavoured vapes amid concerns they encourage younger users. We asked Juul for a comment, but they didn't get back to us in time for this programme. But Gregory Conley, president of the American Vaping Association, did. The association doesn't represent Juul, but rather small and medium-sized vaping businesses in America. And Gregory argues the US vaping health scare is not being caused by nicotine-based vaping products.
As we've seen states like California, Washington, and Oregon legalize marijuana in the past 5-6 years, you have had these new oil-based products come to market. But the actual chemical makeup, because it's an oil, is incredibly different than the nicotine vaping products that have been on the market in the US and the UK for over 10 years. The big problem is not the marijuana itself. It is the chemicals that drug dealers are adding to the cartridges in order to thicken up the liquids, or the pesticides that are sprayed onto the weed. And so the exact cause of these illnesses are not known at the moment, but virtually all of the national news reporters who are tracking this story daily, none of them really truly believe that more than even a handful, if any, of these illnesses are being caused by traditional store-bought nicotine vaping products.
But how can you be sure that all the vaping-related illnesses that we're seeing in the US at the moment are caused by these other elements? I mean, we don't really know. Isn't that the point?
What we know from the CDC data is that the vast majority of people that are being admitted to hospitals are admitting to using illicit THC cartridges. And then among those that are saying that they weren't, we have quotes from doctors who have treated patients as well as health department officials talking about how many youth, in particular, youth and young adults, when their mother, when their father is next to them in a hospital bed asking them what they did to end up in a hospital, they don't freely admit that they were actually using marijuana products. There remains no evidence after 8 weeks of the CDC and multiple state health departments testing perhaps hundreds of different nicotine vaping products. They've yet to find anything unusual in even a single nicotine vaping product.
The other issue, really, that's been brought to the fore with what's happening with the vaping industry in the US is that so many teenagers are vaping and essentially becoming addicted to the nicotine. Isn't that a real concern as well? Another issue that's come out of this crisis.
It is a concern, and it highlights the distinction between the U.S. regulatory system and the system in place throughout the European Union. The European Union, through the Tobacco Products Directive, set a nicotine limit of 2% in nicotine vaping products. In America, it is these products like Juul. Juul's available in the UK, but only in a 2% nicotine version. In a 5% nicotine version, as they are available in the US, they're great for getting heavy adult smokers off of cigarettes, but the reverse of that is that youth have discovered that if you take a big puff off of a Juul, they get a head rush from it. And so we want to see regulations in place that actually distinguish between high nicotine and low nicotine products. But the way the America is going is they're ignoring the high levels of nicotine and simply trying to pretend that flavors are the sole driver of youth vaping, and that's just not the case.
But that's just blaming the regulations. I mean, what's stopping companies like Juul just reducing the amount of nicotine in their products?
That's a choice for Juul to make. I'm not here to defend Juul. What we are worried about most is that across the United States, there are 10 to 14,000 independent vape shops that act as mini smoking cessation clinics, helping smokers find the product that's going to get them off of cigarettes. Those stores aren't really selling Juuls. They aren't really selling the very high nicotine products. But nonetheless, they are being threatened with extinction in the next 4 weeks just because the majority of youth who are vaping are using one particular product from one company that's owned 1/3 by our largest tobacco company. Something is wrong here when you're going to have all these small businesses that are dedicated to helping smokers quit, that have a great track record of not selling to minors, and they're going to be put out of business because some Silicon Valley tech company put their product out in the market without proper controls.
Gregory Conley of the American Vaping Association. Safe to say he's no fan of Juul. But what to make of his claim that America's vaping health scare is down to THC oils and other things being added to nicotine cartridges used in vaping products? A question for Anna Gilmore. She's Professor of Public Health at the University of Bath in the UK and spokesperson for STOP, a global industry watchdog aimed at stopping tobacco organisations and products.
That does appear to have some truth in it, and I think at the moment they're still struggling to understand exactly what is causing this. So they have now looked at the lungs, taken samples from these lungs and shown the inflammation, but I think they can't yet narrow down exactly what's causing it or what mixture of chemicals is causing it. But certainly it appears that in a large number of the people affected, THC has been involved.
Presumably it will take years before they know.
I don't think it will take years now. They can look at the histology. It will take years to have a long-term epidemiological study to understand all the different ways in which e-cigarettes might impact on health. But I think in this kind of outbreak, if you like, we will be able to learn quite a lot from studying that outbreak and what's been happening in that outbreak and using the histology from the samples there.
I mean, the point that the Vaping Association was making in the States, again, not an association of which Juul is part, they were saying the point is that in the UK and other countries, the contents of vaping materials is much more regulated than in the States, and that these things matter.
Yes, the regulatory context does absolutely matter. So we do have a different regulatory environment here. There have been, I think, a couple of cases elsewhere, not necessarily the same, but there have been some case reports here in the UK written up. The situation is complicated because e-cigarettes are potentially an opportunity in some ways, but they're also a threat. And the challenge for public health is to harness that opportunity so that smokers, smoking cigarettes is incredibly deadly. 2 out of 3 will die ultimately from long-term use. So trying to help smokers quit is vitally important. There is some evidence that e-cigarettes can help smokers quit. And if we can harness that potential, you could lead to public health benefit. The difficulty is that there are risks, as we're seeing alongside that, and we have an industry that will try and promote these products to anyone.
Professor Gilmore, more from her again a little later. The thing about America's vaping scare is that it's not just affecting Silicon Valley startups like Juul. This is a business heavily backed by big tobacco. In many cases, those selling vaping products to teenagers or ex-smokers are exactly the same people who used to sell them cigarettes. Juul, for example, is 35% owned by the cigarette giant Altria. All the big tobacco companies are putting money into the development of so-called non-combustibles. It's supposed to be its growth strategy for the future amid tighter regulation and falling smoking rates. Have a listen to Andrei Kalantzopoulos, the CEO of Philip Morris, the world's largest tobacco company and maker of Marlboro cigarettes, speaking to the BBC here recently.
The objective of the company that I set years ago is that we replace cigarettes as soon as possible with smoke-free alternatives. We have invested $6 billion in developing and commercializing these products. 92% of all our R&D expense is in these new products that are smoke-free. And even more important, 60% of any commercial activity we run worldwide, although we're in a few countries yet with the smoke-free alternatives, is on these new products. So cigarettes will be phased out over time, and we'll do our best to convince people to switch.
So how will the vaping scare in the US affect big tobacco's commitment to vaping? Imperial Brands makes cigarettes like Gauloise. It also makes a vaping product, an e-cigarette called Blue, a rival to Juul. And the company's group commercial director of vapor products is Richard Hill.
I think in the short term, the potential for the category is very damaging, because if there's a ban on flavours, then the big risk is that adult smokers who have switched to vaping go back to combustible cigarettes.
Does that mean the end of you, though, as a unit of Imperial Brands?
No, we're highly committed to the future of vaping. We've been on the market for 10 years. We have over 300 scientists working on our scientific research programs, and working with the regulator, particularly in the USA, we will prove the benefit that our products can bring to the American consumer.
But if there is a ban, will that keep going? Will those 300 scientists keep working? Is there a point to it anymore?
We're going to continue to invest in the science and product development to give those 1 billion smokers worldwide the choice they want to seek less harmful alternatives, because there's been such a positive benefit of vaping on national health in the US over the last 10 years since vaping became popular. We can't afford to let that decline.
As a company, is Imperial Brands really putting all its money and investment in vaping, or how much of the investment that the company makes is still going into developing markets where people are smoking traditional tobacco products?
Our whole focus in terms of our business development is on reduced risk products. Just this year, we've launched Pulse heated tobacco in Japan, we've launched Zonex oral nicotine in the UK, and we've expanded Blue from 4 to 20 countries globally, and Peru goes live next week. So sales of our new products are up by more than 50% this year.
But it's about the investment, isn't it? That's really where you get a sense of where the priority is for a company. I mean, are you an investment priority for Imperial Brands, or is a lot of money still being invested at the company in developing traditional markets?
No, we are absolutely an investment priority, and as I said before, we have a balanced portfolio of heated tobacco, of oral nicotine and vaping products, and we continue to invest in the science and product development to give those smokers an opportunity to do something less harmful.
Richard Hill. So the big tobacco companies like Philip Morris and Imperial Brands insist that their future is in vaping, but not everyone is convinced. Back to Professor Anna Gilmore of the Stop campaign, who we heard from earlier.
They were actually using this to rehabilitate their image and try and claim, we've changed, we want people to quit smoking. But, if you read what they're saying about that, really it is hot air. That they're claiming they want everyone to go smoke-free. But actually, if they sold their and this is Philip Morris, if they sold their heated tobacco products just to current smokers, as they claim, their business model would die out. So it's a farcical claim. And actually, there's overwhelming evidence that not only are they trying to sell their heated tobacco products, they're trying to sell their cigarettes. And really, for them, it's about maximising sales of both products. in the markets where cigarettes sales are declining, they're particularly promoting heated tobacco products. And then more in low middle income countries where there is still scope for cigarette sales to increase, they're still promoting cigarette sales. And obviously that, the current situation does present a threat, at least to some of them, particularly those that are exposed to the e-cigarette market in the US. And that's, for example, why we've seen the chief executive of Imperial step down.
So where are tobacco companies making most of their money at the moment?
For cigarettes, the most profitable markets are in the West. So Europe, Australasia, Americas.
Interesting, even though these are the markets where people are stopping smoking and moving on to vaping products.
Well, partly, cigarettes are incredibly profitable because they're highly addictive. So you can keep ramping up the price. And up until now, despite declining sales, by ramping up the price, they have been able to maintain their profits. And for the first time, that model is looking threatened. So the lower middle income country markets absolutely are becoming more and more important to them.
If vaping is outlawed in America, if it becomes illegal overnight, and there is a concern amongst the investment community that this might happen, would that necessarily spell the end of these tobacco companies, of these cigarette makers?
No. E-cigarettes are just one product. We've also got heated tobacco products and we've still got cigarettes. They will continue to sell the other products, and these are companies that are resilient. They have faced a lot of threats and overcome them. Within the tobacco companies, there are some that are more dependent on e-cigarettes and the US market for e-cigarettes, and those will be most threatened here. But I don't think it would spell the end.
Professor Anna Gilmore ending this edition of Business Daily.